You shouldn't paint a perfect picture of your startup. We rather want to know, what are you struggling with? How can we support you? What is it that you are looking for in an accelerator in this case? Is it the investment? Is it something about your team? Is it something about your product? Are you lacking customers? Where are you?
An industry investor is actually the most important part. There's somebody who actually understands the space, have not only supported it with sort of moral support, we actually invested in it. For us, that's another add value in the program, is that you actually get that part working as well.
This is an investment episode with SoundHub Denmark and SoundInvest. They are leaders in the SoundTech industry for acceleration and investment. And it's really cool to see that there's so many common denominators between music tech and sound tech for obvious reasons, but also how they differ. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Sound Connections podcast. Today we have another investment series episode, and we are speaking English today, even though it's three Danish people in the same podcast. But Michael and Rie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
You guys are a part of the same, that's called organizational structure. That's about improving the living conditions for sound tech. This is my own interpretation. But basically what we're going to talk about today is, obviously I normally work within music tech, and sound tech is a big part of it. I am also a tone meister by degree, so I'm very passionate about your space in particular. But we're going to talk about investment, acceleration, business development in the space, because it's really difficult to navigate. But before we go that, Michael and Rie, can you each just introduce yourself a bit? What do you do and what's your job?
Should I start, Jacob?
Yeah, you do.
Perfect. Yeah, but my name is Rie Pripsø. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at SoundHub Denmark. I've actually been a part of the management team when we started in 2018. My role is together with the team here to nurture the sound industry, both the bigger ones and the smaller players, through the sound innovation environment and technology environment we have here in Struer, the city of sound in Denmark. You could say my role as a commercial officer is mainly on establishing the partnerships, the link between the different players. It can be startup to startup, it can be startup to corporates, and also, of course, initiating different kind of programs and development programs that we have in-house.
Amazing. And Mika, your role is connected in that whole structure. Because tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, my name is Michael and Böwadt, and I'm the CEO of SoundInvest. And SoundInvest is sort of the investment arm that we use to invest in the startups that participate in the SoundTech accelerator in SoundHub. So that's where we're connected. I have a background in the pro and consumer audio industry, more on the sort of product management side of things. So that's where sort of I come from in this.
And most people wouldn't necessarily know, but Denmark has for many years been quite successful within the audio industry. Could you guys tell me a bit about that? What's been the history in Denmark, and why is it in Denmark that SoundHub is located?
I think you're completely right. There's been over many, many years a great sound industry in Denmark, where Denmark has established a number of well-known hi-fi and lifestyle brands. And then on top of that, we have quite a big hearing aid industry as well that counts for around the majority, or at least over 50% of all the hearing aids that are sold in the world. So there's something about sound in Denmark and audio in Denmark that is well known. So that kind of, you can say, stronghold for a country is for sure also what we tap into here at SoundHub Denmark, and that we want to nurture even further with both Danish talents, but also talents from abroad.
Again, my background is originally as an audio engineer, and one of the things I'm very proud of as a Danish is also live sound. Like, I think we have amazing sound engineers, amazing venues, amazing festivals, and I think there's a big pride in Danish people in the live industry also, where I'm primarily from, about sound quality and that whole experience. So it's really a big thing in Denmark. But which also means there's investment opportunities. So I guess, Michael, that's sort of also where you sit from. That's your angle.
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact that we have had so many and do still have so many different companies in Denmark has also nurtured a sort of the bar is set fairly high. We used to working with things that really are good, and I think that's where the investment side is also interesting, is because we have a past background to work with these kind of companies, and therefore we also, I believe, are fairly good at spotting the right talent and the right ideas when we start looking at who should be applying for the program and potentially eventually be part of the investments.
Mm. And but if I may add to that, Jacob, I think what you also are pointing out is the live scene. And I think particular scene from Michael's and my side, we have over the last years seen that the pro audio and all the elements that surround the live audience part and the entertainment part has actually been, you could say, on an increasing trend. So you're completely right. It's simply because I come from the hi-fi and the Bang & Olufsen background for many years. So that's why my whole notion start from that. But you're completely right about the entertainment part and performance that is booming.
The really interesting discussion to be had, so I think that's going to be very central to our talk today, is when you have these niche industries, and even though it's very strong in Denmark, on a global level, it's quite niche. When it comes to building successful startups or getting capital, there, generally speaking, is a lack of know-how and experience from business developers, investors, and everything in sort of that role, which also is one of the reasons why it can be a less thriving market within innovation a lot of the times. We see this in music tech, where access to knowledge and experience can be very difficult, which negatively affects the environment of which founders operate in. And what's really interesting is when we have a country like Denmark that has this previous success, it also means we have people who would know how to navigate from a business development side and investment side to improve the area. But I guess that must have been where SoundHub started from. Rie, can you tell me a bit about that process? Like, when did you guys start and what was the reason for it?
You could say basically there are multiple reasons. One of them was, of course, that we could see the stronghold in Denmark that we want to further nurture. Another thing was that being located here in Struer, in the hometown of Bang & Olufsen, then we found ourselves a little bit in the sweet spot of audio and hi-fi. And when B&O actually moved to other premises here in this town, we actually decided to use the building for an international growth hub for everyone that works with sound. So we simply took over, you could say, both a co-working space, but for sure also one of the world's best development hubs with different labs and facilities that we have further developed over the years. So it means it's quite unique in the world that we have a hub where companies can come and actually get help on their development of products and solutions, but also get the advice that is needed. So that was some of the things that we you could say looked into, and then it's also, you could say, fair to say that we also took a very international approach from the very beginning. We very much would like to see that a lot more talents and entrepreneurs actually come by Denmark and learn from the professionals here, because that's also a win-win for Denmark in the long run, that we get even more out there that understand how important sound and maybe sometimes also the lack of sound is important for the world.
So this has been going on for, as far as I remember, like 6-7 years since you got really established. What is your experiences you've had so far? Did you have a thesis about what you would do? Has that been proved? What's sort of been the journey there?
The thesis was originally, and still is, that we want to attract talent. So in the long run, we would love to see that this big house here is filled up with everyone that works with sound. We have 3,500 square meters here. So we have sufficient space to accommodate around 100 full-time workers. But having said that, we have especially worked with startups because we also thought that in order to attract both investment but also the corporates, then we need to start to look into what is it that the innovation that the startup area is contributing with, how can that resonate with what the corporates are looking for. So I think over the years we have learned that the whole idea of working with startups is actually one of the things that really moves the way forward. And also to look at, I think many look at sound as being quite a niche thing where we actually see it quite broad. There's sound in quite many different things. So what we try and cater for is not only the traditional hi-fi audio industry, but it's actually across different verticals. So within health or robotics or the wind energy or whatever it might be, there's always a sound element into it. And that is what we see more and more, that these kind of, you could say, audio solutions or sound solutions is an important part. And that seems to increase.
That's really interesting. Michael, can you describe to me, because as an investor in this space, it builds on an assumption of historical value. There's companies who have been built and who has been valuable, and there's been some owners at one point that's benefited from that. What is it that you use as your justification of investing in this space? What's the upside? Why is it attractive?
I think some of the things that makes it attractive is that it's, in many ways, it's just a space like any other investment space. But we do believe we have sort of a special role to play, in the sense that because we are industry specific, we do have the knowledge both about the technical stuff, but maybe even more importantly about the business side and how the market works, how the market dynamics work, what's kind of the business model that you operate on. All these kind of things is something that we have knowledge and experience with. And that gives us an edge in when we work with the early stage startups, that we actually we can both spot them at the right point in time, we believe, and we also have the ability to help them in many ways. And as Rie is explaining as well, with the facilities, the people that are sort of connected to SoundHub as well, we can also help with the product side. So when you usually look at startups, what everybody's targeting is getting product market fit, right? And we can help not only with the sort of market fit side of things, which is usually where you help. We can also help with the product fit. So we can also sometimes speed up the process of getting the product done, because we can at the right time, or because we have the knowledge of the people around us have the knowledge, we can steer people in the right direction and thereby save valuable time and maybe even more importantly, valuable cash in product development as well.
The really interesting thing about your organizational setup is the combination of business development, partnerships, and cash. If you were to take the business development structure, all this kind of stuff out of the picture, and just look at it historically speaking, what has been sort of the value proposition for investors in this space? Like, what's been the actual value in the products? Is it hardware that can be sold en masse? Is it patented technology? Is it software that can be scaled? Like, there might be many answers to it, but historically speaking, where has been the most interesting part of investment in this space?
I think it's been actually the hardware part. The startups we've seen, we work with for a better part of 60 startups at this point in time. So we have quite a lot of sort of historical data on how well did it go. And the ones we can see that has gone sort of really far has been hardware focused one way or the other, which is quite interesting, because most startups, or at least most investors in startups, have a tendency to shy away from hardware. And the interesting thing here is actually that the best performing has actually been hardware focused, or at least having quite a significant hardware component to the final solution.
Would you contribute that to the isolated case of hardware, or because of the support structure you've built up?
Well, I wouldn't say that we can take credit for all the success the startup had. So I would say that we have had some help, and we had some sort of piece of the success they had. But definitely, I think it's the combination more than anything that actually is the sort of deciding factor. You both have the knowledge about how the market works and the business development works, how the whole setup is. And then you also understand the hardware and the challenges of doing hardware. You can't sort of, I think it's difficult, at least for me, to sort of separate the things in that sense. it is a combined package. And some of the things that, one of the very strong feedback we always get from startups is that it's nice to talk with some people who actually gets it. There's a lot of startups that have come through the accelerator over the years, have been part of other accelerators before, and they end up spending a boatload of times on just explaining why what they're doing makes sense. And we start talking about what is the difficult things and why do we need to start working right away, because we actually understand the business there.
And I think that's really, really important. Sound Connections is partners with Music Tech Europe Academy as a networking partner, and I'm also a mentor in the program, international program. And that's also one of the things we talk about a lot as well. It's just like there's so much help to be gotten from accelerated programs in general, but at one point, the basic knowledge and the basic help, I'm not trying to make it less than it is, just is what it is.
Yep.
And when you've covered those basics, the niche understanding of approach is so incredibly important. And spending maybe 2 hours with the right person might matter much more than 20 hours with a generalist. So I guess that's also how you approach your value towards startups.
Yeah, exactly. And I can only support what it is that you're saying, that what we hear from the startups that has both been in the house, but also in particular participating in the program, is that they meet people that understand what they're doing. They don't need to dumb down their solution. People get it. But also that they meet different mentors, coaches, and also some that genuinely want to help them. So there's no catch there. They meet a community or collaborative network that is really interested in helping them, and also that they meet, you can say, different people. So again, it might be a startup that has some issues with patenting. Okay, if that's the sole thing, then let's help on that part. But there might be others that are struggling with the whole idea of whether or not they should be a startup at all, or whether or not they are going to be or continue to be a CEO in their own startup. So I think we also take them by the hand where it matters the most. And thereby, you can say, then they get faster in you could say, in their development, but they also unleash the potential they have a lot faster than others, simply because they get help from professionals.
Yeah, and I think there's an underlying point in this as well, and I think there's something about Danes and the way we sort of communicate and the way we sort of culturally work, and I think it actually fits very well with an accelerator in the sense that we have a very low sort of power distance. We are very direct, and that actually helps quite a lot because we don't have that much time with the startups. When we have 5 months, it's a three camp program, so we spend 10 days in total physically with the startups, and then we have online sessions on top of that. But we don't have that much time, so we need to get working quite fast, and we need to get to the point quite fast. And we have a tendency to do that, and we have been able so far to foster an environment and a tone of voice and the way we work that actually means that we've really fast gets down to where things actually starts to hurt, so to speak. They don't have to paint a nice picture, because that's what you do when you're applying and all that, and they're really good at that. But as soon as you start working, it's super important fast to get to, so where are the problems? Because there are always problems.
And I think also what we have experienced now we're in the recruitment process for the upcoming program, but many of the startups that we talk to on an online meeting and getting to know us better is that they are asking us whether or not they should send a pitch deck. And we said, no, you shouldn't, because we need to learn who you are. You shouldn't paint a perfect picture of your startup. We rather want to know what are you struggling with? How can we support you? What is it that you are looking for in an accelerator? In this case, is it the investment? Is it something about your team? Is it something about your product? Is it are you lacking customers? Where are you? We would rather get to know of that, because as Michael is indicating, there's a high level of trust among us in the cohorts we have, and that is really benefiting. Everyone is benefiting from that, and people or participants, they really learn from each other as well.
Let's linger some time with the problems. And obviously, in any startup, there's a lot of problems. So let's talk primarily about investment capital. because there's a reason why you have an investment arm as well. What is the problems with startups in this space? How much capital do they need? Are the investors out there? Michael, can you just walk me through the investment landscape for these startups? What are they struggling with?
I think the biggest challenge for the startups is making sense, so to speak, in a world where SaaS cases and all kind of things are sort of running with the sort of the better part of the cap, at least the attention, you could say, more than anything. So they're sort of struggling to get attention because they're easy to brush aside as being just another niche thing. I don't really get it, kind of thing. So that's one of the things that they struggle with. It's quite difficult to get the right people in, so to speak. So that's one thing that they're struggling with. And the other is the fact that it's hardware. A lot of the time, it's connected to hardware. And that alone actually pushes quite a lot of investors away, you could say. So those are some of the kind of things that they definitely are struggling with. They do get investors anyways, and we actually see quite a lot of the startups that we work with have investments or find investments along the way. I think also one of the things we are bringing to the table in SoundInvest is also the fact that there's an institutional investor that has invested, and that definitely that was a hypothesis we had when we started out, and we invested in 6 cases so far, and some of the cases are starting to get their new investment rounds in place, and it has definitely helped them having an institutional investor on board that gets it. The fact that an industry investor is actually the most important part. There's somebody who actually understands the space, have not only supported it with sort of moral support, we actually invested in it. And that's the big change for us, because in the past we more had the moral support. We've been part of the accelerator. I could be talking about why it made sense, but the fact that we now also invested sort of raises the bar of the support that you're giving. And I think that's then, for us, that's another add value in the program, is that you actually get that part working as well.
Validation capital is really important, and I will try to reserve it a bit more for the later part of the conversation, because I really want to understand the problems more before we sort of go into it and sort of what the benefits are from that. But I can assume one of the problems is also the lack of investors in general in the space. I can't imagine that this is, where people dive head first into the investment space. Is this like primarily like corporate investors, like, companies that have succeeded before they invest traditionally in the space? So what's sort of the persona that people meet?
That's very, very diverse. Also stemming from the fact that we have 5 different nationalities in the startups that they come from 5 different countries. So it's very, very different. The startups we have one startup, for instance, from London, where they are industry people actually investing in that one. So that's more of an industry case. What we also see is that it's geographically, it's something. It's the local heroes, you could say. It's the local investors. So it's much more about the vicinity. It's more about the local connection, you could say. So that's one thing. Some of them are IT. We see a few IT investors. All of them, what I'm talking about now, is all business angels. It's very few institutional investors. I've seen a few deep tech investors in our previous cohorts, but it's still difficult for them to sort of understand the tech. When you're doing tech sales to corporates, the way that business works, you could say. So it is very diverse, and it's usually angels, and it's angels that have some sort of, either it's geography, it's because it's the local startups, they want to support something that's local, or they have some sort of interest. They play music. There's something in their personal life that there's some sort of. There's a bit of Conor Moore in it as well. That's what we see.
And I think it's also important to say, just to add to what you're saying there, that there are very few investors out there that solely would invest in sound, because they maybe, as you're saying, they don't get it, or they're at least not too knowledgeable about the area. So a lot of time we also spend dialogues with the startups around what bigger agendas are they tapping into, because sometimes you get so focused on your own solution that you forget that you are actually within health, or you are tapping into the sustainability agenda, and that's maybe the talk you need to have with the investors, well knowing it's maybe not the talk you have directly with your customers as such. So I think also there's some learning there for the startups to get that message over the counter, you would say.
There's one thing that I can see, just reasoning the information I have now that could be a problem, is you have said that a lot of the success, or at least the indication of success, comes from the hardware. You've also said that the primary investors in this space are angels. Like, that doesn't necessarily fit too well. Again, it rarely becomes a VC case, and anyways, hardware is not necessarily always a VC case, but like the heavy money to take something from prototype to a commercialization in hardware it's a lot of money. So how do people solve this? Do they solve it?
They do solve it, but it takes time. And I think that's the other thing that's different from traditional VC cases, is that the time it takes to do semi-organic growth, let's put it like that, is just something that takes time. And it's slower in the beginning than a lot of investors would usually expect. That's not the same as you can't actually achieve it. It's definitely possible. We have one company that has on the better side of 70 million euros in turnover, and 80% of that cap table is still on the founder's side. So, and it's a hardware product. It can be done, but about being clever and actually expecting and accepting that the early stages, the first years, will take time, and it will take more time than, say, a SaaS case or something.
And that's also...
Sorry.
No, it's just to say that that's also, you ask about what is that we have learned over the years. I think also what we have learned is that there are quite many startups that focus too much on a single part of their product for too long, instead of reaching out to experts a lot earlier. So what we have seen is that more and more startups actually reach out for the competence we have here, so they actually begin to use SoundHub Denmark as their competence center or as their development partner. And that's a little bit of a new thing, where formerly we were maybe more a matchmaking place, where now they actually come and say, can you help us with that? Because we are a group of founders, or we are a little team, but we don't really know anything about electronics, for example. Can you help us with that part? So I think that's also has been a change in the market, that maybe the startup has been, they faster reached out for help than they maybe did some years back.
I'm curious to hear and I have an idea of it now when you talk, what the typical narrative would be towards investors on like what type of case this is. According, for example, to my research in music tech, which I do a lot, I argue that generally speaking, the most attractive way of positioning music technology companies, especially from a software perspective, is that valuations are generally speaking lower, and exits are also lower, but the road to getting there is quite fast. There's a lot of ecosystems consolidating, which means I believe generally speaking, the most optimal investment narrative to have when it comes to returns is multiples, so low valuation, low exits, but at a faster environment than other SaaS products. Like, there's a lot of SaaS products out there, tech products that needs to go to a certain stage of revenue to be attractive for acquisition, when music tech oftentimes are strategic acquisitions as a part of a bigger ecosystem play. That's at least what my research points towards. But with SoundTech, and again, I'm just trying to make these general statements, especially when it comes to the hardware perspective, the investor narrative, would that be, this is a question I'll try and formulate it, that this is a long-term investment, generally speaking, that has a higher chance of margins for dividend payouts of owners, and then a larger exit at a point when it starts becoming a legacy company? Like, what is the usual case? What is the usual narrative you present, generally speaking, for investors? That's
a very, very tough question to do a generalization on. and I need to sort of look at the startups we haven't invested in, but the startups we've been working with in the past, right? So I think they fall into at least two categories. Let's divide it into that. So there's the industry exit. There's the fairly fast, say, few years industry exit, where it's a technology, really difficult to get it sold, really difficult to get it into a lot of products, takes a lot of time, but then an exit opportunity arises, and that means that the investors on board actually get a really good deal because they have some sort of unique thing that one in the industry actually wants, and we outright buy them basically. So that's one narrative is that's what you will see, and then it's a 3-4 year time frame that you're looking at, so fairly fast. The other is more building a brand, products that are actually consumer facing, and where it's more like a standard consumer case, you could say. It's more about building a brand, building the business that way. That's kind of the two scenarios where it's more like and then it's more like a normal sort of consumer-facing product type. Never mind that it's an audio product. That's not the important side of it. And I do think it's an important point to underline again that you're not selling on the fact that you're a SoundTech company. You're selling on whatever solution that you're doing, and you need definitely to frame yourself in categories investors usually look at. Software, platforms, hardware products, whatever, consumer, B2B, whatever. You need to understand the frameworks that investors are usually looking at, and you need to figure out what part of that framework, where do you fit? And yes, there's some sort of sound in it, but that's not the important part.
Yeah, so there's really about first of all, the industry markets fit from one side, and then there's the product market fit from another side. What do you see, really, when companies reach out to you? What's the sort of the mixture, the percentage between those two? And again, I know we're doing generalizations, but let's just stick to it for understanding. Where are people on that? Is it mostly consumer facing, or is it B2B industry? What do you see?
I think that's really a mix. So it's not because we favor one or the other. I think what we mostly see, if we're coming back to the phase they are within, that the whole market validation part is something where many startups tend to think about it when we get closer to launch, then we need to talk about it. Where we try and force them in our program that they already in the initial process of looking into the problem and the solution they're bringing to market also need to get that validated. So there's also a validation of the problem or the solution, and not just a traditional commercial market validation when you're getting closer to launch. And I think that has really been a wake-up call for many of the startups in our program, how valuable that information is. Because it will be a big problem if you bring a product to market where you haven't really tested anything on beforehand and spent a lot of time and money. So what we see is that hands-on approach and where startups actually are really being forced out to talk to potential customers or collaboration partners for that matter. That's really where it creates that wow feeling and aha for those startups saying, okay, now I actually better understand my own business than before I joined the program.
But what kind of persona are the founders? And, I have my own idea. It would probably be people like me. I studied, electrical engineering, and I dropped out because it was not creative enough. And I did like a Tomeister degree, which is also nerdy in its own right. So I can imagine most founders in this space come from a technical background. And again, I'm just assuming, and you can confirm more. Which means that the charismatic hustler, which is oftentimes associated to a more Americanized version of founders, which are still relevant in all territories, might be something that, generally speaking, is lacking. Is that true, or like?
No, I wouldn't say so. Yes, we do have some very nerdy founders. Of course, we do, but we also have the other side of things. We also have the more commercial thinking, outgoing type of personas as well. So it's not it's not again. It's really difficult to box them in and put them into one box. It's very diverse in many ways. Of course, it's also part of our screening process as well. It is really hard to get. If it's a really nerdy out of university kind of thingy, and there's nobody on the team who has any sense of business, it's a tough sell for to us basically, because we know that this is going to be complicated in the long run. Not to say that we wouldn't invest, but it's definitely a flag for consideration. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. I think if I try to say there's some kind of, you say, common picture, I would say for all the startups we have worked with that have really succeeded is that all of them individually have some kind of domain knowledge, whether or not it's from a technical perspective, or they know something about sustainability and design, or they maybe are familiar with the live scene internationally. I don't know, but they have some kind of, you can say, ingredient themselves that has actually tricked them into becoming an entrepreneur and starting the company. But what they have been then also good at is establishing at least a little team around them. And as Michael is also indicating, we are catching them at the time where they do have a small team, because that's a criteria for a SoundTech accelerator, that they do have a team. Otherwise, they'll not get on board. But of course, we can help them prior to that in SoundHub. But accelerator-wise, they need to have a team. So it's not just nerds.
I think
no.
Also touching on something else, Rien, and that is they all have either personal experience or some other insights into why this product or this problem needs solving, and why this product or this solution will actually benefit from it. So they all have experience in the field that they're in, and they all have some sort of background that does either from industry or from education or from whatever part of their life, but they do all have insights into why is this a problem and why is it worth solving. And that's more what we basically also are looking for, is that they need to have some sort of intrinsic knowledge about this field and this particular problem that they're tackling.
Yeah. But what is it investors are looking for? Like, what kind of, again, you have a screening process of having a healthy team, but I can also assume that there's some sort of persona that investors in this space that has this industry knowledge is looking for. Is that like it's a repeating pattern you've seen what's attractive for them?
No, I don't think so, actually. I think that's very different from investor to investor as well. I think investors are also very diverse in many ways. We do have, of course, our stereotypes, but I do not believe that they're actually that real, so to speak. So it is quite diverse, and the founder teams we have are quite diverse, actually. And the same goes for the investors.
Yeah. Are there any common denominators? I think you touched upon it very briefly, like investors that has some sort of touch point with the product or the industry. Is that the only common denominator you see, or is there others?
I think for all investors, I think the team matters, the growth potential, the scalability, that's common for all. I think what we have started out with some years back is actually starting a little bit a crusade, because we meet too many investors that say, I don't invest in sound because I don't understand it. And then I often say, but you don't understand robotics or windmills either, but you still can invest in that part. So I think there's something about that investors, they need to see whether or not there's a business potential. And the way we look at it is that if they are just a little bit in doubt of whether or not that there is a potential, or that the solution is right, then use us as their sounding board. Let us try and, you can say, validate whether or not this is good stuff, or whether you should derive from investing in it. So I think a number of the things that the offers we have towards startups on the market validation is actually also something that the investors could benefit from if they wanted to reach out and get that knowledge. We haven't seen it yet, but we would love to do it.
I can imagine. But one of the things that I see a lot, because a lot of the companies we work with have a either the first line of contact with artists or second line of contact with artists, which means that oftentimes startups has an assumption that, well, music it has a sentiment to it. There's an emotional aspect of understanding music or having a relationship with it. One of the things that I argue a lot is actually you might mistakenly believe that's your strength. I believe that that's actually a weakness because there is a sentiment associated to it. They automatically either have negative association to it, which, is negative inherently, or positive, but it means they also have a formed opinion, which means they also disqualify themselves for due diligence, for example, because if it's positive, they would also know that they don't know anything other than that they appreciate it. So there's no, in my opinion, there's no real good angle from coming from sentiment into music investment. Like that, it doesn't really exist unless you just spot on with one particular investor and how they feel. Generally speaking, I believe really trying to steer away as much as possible you can from that sentiment is the better solution, generally speaking. Is that also what you see?
Definitely. I think that was also what I was trying to get at previously, is that you need to fit the brackets where the investors are usually looking. So that the types of startups that, or the way that you sort of divide startups into different types, you need to figure out what those types are. The fact that there's audio involved or SoundTech involved is something that is on a solution or a problem-based kind of thing, but it's not in itself something that qualifies you in any way for any investor, including investors who have an audio background. Especially the investors with an audio background, they're almost even more reluctant to invest because the fact that it's audio, they just know that can be difficult as well. And the thing that you know the most about is probably where you can see the most problems as well. So sometimes, often it's not industry investors that are the best investors, or investors with a background in the industry, which was the original assumption, which has proven not to be correct, at least in a broader sense. But I do agree in the sentiment, and that side of it is actually not something to promote at all. It's actually, you need to prove that there's a good business here, that there's a growth market, and all the standard things. It's the same things that you will be doing for any other startup, so to speak. So I do think that we have a tendency, and had a tendency in the past, to overemphasize those kind of things, which are more emotional, which at the end of the day doesn't come down to what we do when we have an investment side of things.
But there's something about you could say the commitment and what drives you, and that's of course also an emotion as such. But that we have seen across. Now we have been working with startups from nearly 20 countries, so very different cultures we work with, and there's some kind of pattern where we begin to see that there are some countries or cultures where you really aim for it. That's a make or break for you. Where other cultures are a little bit more reluctant to say, yeah, it's a little bit of a lifestyle kind of thing for me now, and if I don't make it, then fine. I just wanted to try it out. So there's a nerve to it, I think, that also the investors look for. Do you have fire in your eyes? Do you really believe in it? Can you sell the product or sell yourself? I think there's something there we also look for when we select for the program, and of course also Michael does.
And that goes more with the territory of the international side. That one of the things that we experience there is that, without bashing Danish startups, there is a tendency there that there are some of those startups that are driven more like this is what I do now, we'll see whether I make it. Whereas a lot of the startups we work with internationally are like, this is what I want to do, and I'm passionate about this in a way that this is the most important thing for me ever. And that's something that the investors can and appreciate, at least. So it's an interesting side to it as well. And there is something about, I would though say that there's something about audio and SoundTech where a lot of people are more passionate about it maybe than sort of the average, you could say. They have some sort of emotional attachment to the fact that audio, and I think that shines through in the way they present themselves and the company and the product, is that they're very, very passionate about it in a way that is not necessarily always the case when I see other startups pitch, which are in more sort of whatever it is that they do, but it's maybe not something that is so emotional, you could say.
So where do you guys place yourself in a investor portfolio mindset? Let's take angels, or just for the ease of it, like a super angel or family office standpoint. When it comes to your startups in general, what's the value proposition you bring to the table there? Like, how does this differentiate from the other startups? Why is this attractive in that connection?
I think it comes down to the financial side of things at the end of the day. Do we have a chance to make a return on the fund? I mean, again, you sort of strip away all the emotional side of it. And the argumentation is basically because we're an industry investor and we have the setup around the accelerator program with the competences and the facilities and all these things, we have a better chance, or our startup or investment cases have a better chance of making it, basically. 80% of the startups we worked with over the years are still alive, which is way better than the average. So we have some merit to that claim as well. And I do think that's the sell that we have, is that because we have that ability to spot the startups right and understand them and select them correctly and help them afterwards, we actually end up with startups that have a better chance to survive and make it, basically, and therefore also make a return on the fund.
I think that's really interesting. I want to explore that more. 80%, that's an incredible number. Is that so? Would that be because people have better expectations going into, like, let's say, less delusional idea of growth? They're more patient. They don't overspeed up things. Like, why? I need to understand this. Why do you guys believe? And of course, your participation matters. But in generally speaking, why is the survival rate so high?
I think it has a lot to do with our selection process. We are so lucky that every year we get around, I would say, close to 500 emails from people that want to, you could say, learn more about the product and the program we have. And out of these, we have around 50 that apply. So it means if we are only looking for between 5 to 9 startups in a cohort every year, we are fortunate to select those that we believe in the most. And a part of that, you could say, belief. Now we've talked about the business aspects and the team, but it's also whether or not we think we are a good fit for them. So we are also quite honest about that they should fit into what we can help them best with, and also whether or not they are coachable. And you can always laugh about a little bit about that. Aren't we all coachable in some way or another? But there needs to be some kind of good chemistry between us as well. So I think we capture those that we really believe in, and maybe that's also what we can see in the survival rate of these, that they are also good. They are good. That's the thing. And then we give them a helping hand through the program.
There must also be a opposite of the fail fast unicorn mentality, like, because that's sort of what you see in, especially in the, Americanized version of founders' journeys. It's just like, just go for it, raise capital and fail fast and move on, that kind of stuff, and shoot for the stars, and then die really hard if you don't. Like, that's mentality that is the success of that is incredible, and the graveyard is everywhere. Is it because you guys lie on the other part of the spectrum also, or like, what's your explanation?
I do think, to some degree, yes. This is not, we're not on a unicorn hunt here. That would be foolish to do if you look at how many SoundTech companies that are out there that have actually made it so far as to become a unicorn. There are far and few between, and they are that in all businesses, by the way. But so I do think that that's one part of it, is that we want only to have cases that have potential to grow and become big companies. That's definitely what we're going for. We are not going for companies, and we're not expecting companies to go on that really fast unicorn growth journey. A few of them might, but the majority won't. So just from that, I think there is it's a different trajectory that they're on. Anyways, the other thing actually ties a bit back to what we talked about before about the passion side of things. And I do think there is some stamina in these founders as well, which might be different from others because they're very passionate about the business that they're in. They're very passionate, and that might actually give them sometimes the extra or the energy to go the extra mile, which might be the thing that they need in order to make it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I think that also what might position founders in this space to pivot more over a longer time, or because, if I'm sometimes perplexed. I speak to a lot of founders also outside of music tech, and I hear founders who are on like long, difficult journeys where they saw an opportunity in something they might know a bit about, but then they jumped into it and then they became experts over time. And for me, I don't understand why you would have that stamina, because, sure, the success can be attractive, but as any experienced founder would know, like, that's not enough. Like, the journey is way too difficult, way too risky to have that as the primary goal. And that's where I'm very perplexed about how that at scale happens. But again, I think just to support your claim, that might also be what's happening here, and what also speaks to the longevity of it is because, yes, there's a business goal. There's absolutely needs to be that on behalf of investors and themselves and their families, my wife, in my case. But but there's also just, I would do this for free. Do you know what I mean? Like, if that's not healthy, I'm not saying people should do it. I would.
And I know quite a few founders that have the same way. I mean, and I think that it's important not to make it into something where it becomes all rosy and stuff. But I do think there is some passion about the field that they're in and the problem they're solving. So that might actually be the reason why they stay on. And I do think that stamina has. There's some real good things in that, in the sense that actually sometimes means that you have a bigger chance of actually making it, because the timing side of things is really difficult to control. You can't really control the timing. But if you're good at staying and still figuring out where is the path, you heighten your chances of success, in my opinion.
So if I can, again, I like simplifying things because that's sort of how I work as a human being. And I know that boxes are not boxes, they're just made up. But if you were to simplify an investor parallel storytelling, is if you, let's say you would have a traditional investor that, where one side is day trading, another one is like ETF funds. I can imagine that if you make that comparison, investors in the space would probably be a lot closer to the ETF fund style. Like, yeah, we know it's risky money, but we also know that, most likely from a risk perspective, we'll do okay. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of the general mindset people come in with?
At least from the general partners in the fund, that's the mindset they come in. That's definitely what they have attracted them to invest in the fund, is that they can see that this is something that has potential, and they know it'll take time. So that the 10-year lifespan of the fund makes sense. It is what is needed to make this happen. I sometimes wonder a bit with the standard sort of unicorn hunt fund, that why do you have a 10-year lifespan on the fund if you expect everything to happen within the first couple of years or 3 years or whatever. I think there's some built-in dilemmas in some of those things. We expect it to use the full lifespan of the fund to make a return, and that is also the promise we made to our investors.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's also like a really important takeaway from this conversation is, in most startups, there's very few tech startups that could be bootstrapped, like for real, like at least to come to a level where it would be attractive when it comes to how much it costs being a founder. Some do it and I applaud it and, jealous, but, most not. And startups need to be aware of this before they go into the journey of growing their company. And because most likely startups will be needing capital. And there just needs to be an awareness that is what you're building, does it have investor market fit? And if not, could that be a reason for actually pivoting? And it doesn't mean that the thing you're building doesn't have value and it's not going to be successful. It's just like, that's an extra element you need to consider when you go into this journey. Like if you position yourself of being extra difficult to get capital, historically speaking, that also means you have less of a chance of succeeding. That's at least, my presumptions. And I think that's one of the things that people miss a lot, because I think when people talk about investors, it's more like, well, how do we get to the next stage? But it's also like, well, do you even have a case that is positioned for success? Because if you don't have at least a hypothetical investor market fit before you go into this, you're really doing yourself a disservice, in my opinion. Is that something you could resonate with?
Yes, I would say. Also because we, as a part of the program, we challenge their business assumptions. So we have seen, even though we haven't calculated how many that has pivoted throughout the program or afterwards, but we do see some that actually change completely path based on the knowledge they have gained by reaching out to the market or whoever it might be that they want to, you could say, team up with. So I think there's something about that where you start at one end and find out that maybe you need to go in a completely different direction with what you believe in.
Yeah, maybe this also ties, there's a line over in what we want to achieve as well, is that I also have a vision for a situation where we have worked with so many startups and therefore so many different investors that have decided to invest in this space, and that will over time also turn into an interesting pool of potential investors for new startups that we work with, and also investors that have sort of come to understand sort of the business terms that you're in when you work with the startups that we work with. And I'm really looking forward to that as well. And the other angle to that is that it's international investors, which mean that we have a broader appeal, you could say. It's very difficult for most startups to actually get broad enough in their outreach to investors. It usually becomes very local in the beginning, very difficult in the beginning, potentially a bit better internationally later on. But very few startups are actually live long enough to be subjected to an international investor community. And I do think that that's an inherent problem for most startups. There might be an investor out there that is a fit, but how do you make that contact? And that's one of the things that I believe we will be able over time to help with.
And I think
we can also see that many of the startups, that we have helped over the years, we continue actually to work with them after the program. So it means it is they become a part of a community or an ecosystem that they always can rely upon. So these alumni are, you could say, both important for us, but we also important for them in that sense, that we can be there and support them also when they grow. And what you can say, what it has proven also is that they are so happy for what they have experienced through us that they are also willingly would like to expose it to others. So when Financial Times last year reached out and tried to rank the leading hubs of Europe, we were among those and were actually ranked as the best in the co-working and lab area. So there's something about, you could say, that community feeling that I think we, both from an investor point of view, but also for the startups, we should continue to nurture.
I think as a closing note to the conversation, which has been great, and thank you so much for being generous with your time, is I really love the notion of there might be someone out there and how do you get there? And I think sometimes that's one of the biggest things for startups to consider in this space, also music tech, I know they're quite similar, is that everyone knows there's no straight line, sure. But sometimes in these industries, there might be more circles than you might expect, just because you're kind of but you're working towards the right luck, the right connection, the right thing, because there's far between the right people, but they're out there. So oftentimes you just need to go the journey of becoming attractive or positioned, having that intro, more so than other industries, where because there's more investors, like on a statistical level, it's if you speak loud enough and you have something of actual value, the chances of being heard might be higher than here. And I think that's really worth really thinking about. Like, just because it takes a long time, and sometimes it's not, on purpose that it takes a long time, doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a great startup. It just means a lucky moment will probably happen if you work hard enough and long enough, and it might take longer than other people might expect from parallel industries.
Yep.
But they're out there. And I think that's sort of what I admire of both SoundHub and SoundInvest, is that you guys are willing to being the lower barrier of entry of making those connections happen, because I believe that's one of the most important things to, on a long-term perspective, making this an attractive place to be a founder. And at the end of the day, that's what I'm obsessed about. Not so much about the companies, but the founders, because this is people who create innovation. And if they succeed with one startup, chances are they'll do something pretty great again afterwards. So it's a repeating thing. But Michael and Henri, this has been really great. Thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.